Welcome to the Leadership Standard, where we explore real-life stories from leaders across the business spectrum. This is an intimate discovery of how they shift between triumphs, struggles, failures, disruptions, and future opportunities on a daily basis. We operate from the philosophy that leaders are made and not born. And this podcast reveals how high achievers accelerate through the challenges, win both at work and at home, and lead with confidence while accomplishing their goals, which is the reason I am thrilled to have our guest today, James Whitehouse. Now, James is a distinguished educator, leader, and the first male head of school in over a century of Elmwood, a private girls' school based in Ottawa. Now, he was formerly a professional rugby player in the UK. He transitioned into education after an injury, and he's taught in various schools before being the head of school around London. And then he made a significant contribution since he's been there. His expertise in education has recently been acknowledged as he represented Canada in a conference at the White House, aiming to enhance and to really learn about the US education system. James and I share a common background in education, both formally serving in capacities in different schools and being actively involved in the tech community. In this conversation, we look forward to exploring his unique insights on the role of educators and leaders, and distinguishing and discussing the skills transferable from education to leadership. James, thank you so much for taking the time today to be a guest on the Leadership Standard.
Thanks so much for having me here today.
James, I'd love to jump right in and ask you, based on an interview I saw previously, what stood out to me is your passion and purposefulness in the work you do as a head of school, as an educator. So I'd love to start off by asking you the question about what is it about helping to shape the future of girls' education at Elmwood that is important to you, your community, and the world beyond?
An awesome question. Yeah, I know I'm extremely passionate about this. My father was an educator, my mother, my whole family is. So I kind of tried to avoid all of that and went into sport and hoped that would be successful. It kind of failed and I rocked into this. But why am I passionate about education? Well, first of all, the children are the most precious resource we have in the world. They are going to be the people who can make a change in the future. And let's be frank, right now, the world is in need of people who can make a difference, be it scientists, be it politicians, be it government influencers. But really, let's just talk about kind people in the world. I think more than ever right now, we're looking at a global situation where kindness is lacking in some spaces, and respect is, and so we need to do that. So education is about developing people. It isn't about teaching people numeracy or literacy. It's part of that. But really what schools do and what educators do is develop a whole person. They develop their social skills, their ability to have relationships, to make friends, to deal with tricky situations in life. And then on top of that, you layer in the skills and attitudes about subjects and disciplines. And what we do is when students leave our buildings and go into the world is hope that we've created the very best version of themselves, that they have passions and dreams that they can achieve. And what we've done is instilled in them those morals and those social values as well, and working with the families and the parents to create these incredible people that are going to be change makers. And we need change makers. Like, we can't rely on what we've done for years and years and years and just keep repeating the model. We need young people who can make a difference. And I'm lucky enough to be with some of the most incredible young people in the world. Like, I still teach. I insist on teaching. I'm in the classroom. I'm about to teach this afternoon. I teach world history to grade 12s. And some of the ideas they have, they're outstanding. And if we ignore them, well, that's our fault. So as educators, as a school, the reason I'm passionate is because, I want to leave this place in a better place. And what we get to do is create the future. And if you could see where I am right now, I have incredibly happy, smiling kids who are on their journey to becoming really cool, awesome people.
Yeah, well, I love that. I love that focus on developing the whole girl or the whole person, and it's not just about the subjects. Now, one thing we have in common is we both have daughters. And I think both our daughters are in elementary school or right around there. So one other thing I heard you once say was, I can't tell you what's going to happen in 5 years, but I can tell you that our girls, meaning the girls at your school, will be prepared for it. And you mentioned kindness. You mentioned what I interpret as a culture of learning or continuous learning and developing the full person. What are some of the skills, attributes, or approaches? Now, there's a lot there, so we could just focus on one of the three that you think that young girls, in this particular case, girls like your daughter and mine and your students, will need in the future of work.
Schools are getting thrown this stuff at them all the time about, are you preparing them for the future? Like, what's coming up? And the truth is, we don't know what the future holds. We don't. I mean, AI has come on like a train. Like it's hit us in education so fast and so hard. But I think that's cool, because what we've really been doing since day one here, and I think Elmwood is an amazing example of it, is teaching the students skills, attitudes. So see, this is why content's so silly sometimes, because if you just teach the material, when the material changes or the whole ecosystem changes, no one's ready for it. So specifically for my daughter, which it's amazing for me to watch, it's that ability to be inquisitive, to ask questions, to inquire, to have the skills to discern information when it comes at them, and not just accept nonsense that comes from left field, that just because someone said it loud, like, or someone said it confidently. The ability to, understand that information comes from multiple perspectives, multiple ways, multiple belief systems, and then discern it into a way forward. And if you focus on a skills approach to learning, then all you're doing with content then is using it to help support an argument or a debate or a direction. But the skills of things like analysis, risk-taking, the ability to synthesize, the ability to judge, the ability to evaluate, those skills are going to be life-changing for them, because they apply to every single possible potential workplace they go into, whatever that looks like. So developing those skills are the thing that are going to make a difference. But what's most important is their ability to be social people in an environment where there are different views and perspectives. I think that for some reason, the world's forgotten that schools, like this whole movement to everything should be online, like the online world's best. We shouldn't be in person together. Honestly, as an educator, that's dangerous, because what schools do is they create a social capital that exists within a building, so you get to understand differences. You have arguments, you have failures, you have laughing, you have all these other things that come together. And it's that ability to navigate people and the human construct that is so valuable. And then you layer on the skills and attitudes of learning in the classroom, and then you layer on the content when it's relevant, then you get someone who's incredible.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the importance of socialization. And I don't think it's just for elementary students or high school students. It's university and beyond. And possibly we're now in a culture where it's not emphasized as much in society, of that one-to-one ability to converse, to deal with conflict, to have courageous conversations. I'd really like to hear your thoughts on how you teach and coach the girls in your school to be more effective at dealing with conflict and challenging situations in a social construct or environment.
I actually think the whole belief that even adults, I have an argument on my street pretty much every week about distance working and working from home is a better model. I fundamentally disagree. I don't want to get political, but I agree humans need to be human beings, because we are social creatures who need the stimulus and that ability. So that's the side issue. But how do we teach? I mean, conflict is a part of everyone's life. But what I think it is, it's all about feedback. For me, it's like everything comes back to effective and positive and kind feedback. Conflict normally emerges when some kind of feedback has been either given incorrectly or received incorrectly. It's an emotional thing. So what we do here at Elmwood is we teach the students how to give and receive feedback in a kind and respectful manner. Our values are all about respect and kindness and listening with intent and those kind of things. But regardless of all of that, conflict's going to happen. So I'll look out into the play yard right now, and there will be something that will happen, likely, where conflict emerges. And that's really healthy and it's really good. But what you do next is the most important thing. It's about teaching them that conflict's okay. Disagreeing is okay. Having different opinions is okay. What is not okay is not to respect each other going forward. And so we've done a lot of work with emotional coaching for our teachers, where we've had professional development for our teachers, where we are trained how to deal with situations, not only with students to students, but adults to adults, because these conflicts exist with adults too. And we have to model correctly what the students see, because they're watching everything. Students watch everything. They see how we do things. So yeah, we're now training ourselves as emotional coaches, but we're also coaches. I'm one of the things I'm pushing at the school is to have every teacher trained as a coach. And one of the fundamental things about coaching is listening, understanding, and hearing what people are saying. And so we do that with the students. We train them from pre-K, which is 3 years old, to understand the power of listening, the power of respect, the power of realizing, you know what, you're not going to get on with everybody, but you do have to respect people. And every year it is deliberately programmed into the curriculum through units of inquiry, through the IB, through global mindedness, to keep developing that. It's still going to go wrong. But the worst thing to do is say, conflict's awful, we can't have it. Conflict's actually kind of a good thing, because that's where the coolest things come from, where you disagree with something and you move it forward. But if you don't know how to handle it, that's when you have problems.
Mm-hmm. One thing that stood out there was you talked about a term I haven't quite heard before, emotional coaching. And I find that really inspiring, that you're teaching teachers, adults, through this lens, as a nuanced approach, as opposed to just coaching them on how to be better instructors or how to give a better, how to give students feedback in terms of their grades. Now, you and I have something else in common, which is we're both connected to TEC Canada. So for those of you who are listening who don't know about TEC, this is the largest CEO advisory board group in Canada. It's like a business think tank of some of, from my experience, the best and most passionate and dedicated minds in the business world. You're a member, I'm a speaker. And what I'd love to ask you is, being in a business group like this, do you see the need for emotional coaching, not just how to run your business, for business owners now across the country?
Honestly, we're a people business as a school, but everybody in my tech group are also, the businesses have people in them. And to be the most powerful and effective business, you need to have powerful, effective, and empowered people. So it's actually, I feel a bit silly because I spent years focusing on sometimes the wrong thing. And now I think actually the most important thing is having people that are experts in dealing with other people, supporting them emotionally, getting the best out of everybody in the organization. So the work we've been doing is actually transformative, because now the conversations we're having amongst adults is about understanding each other's emotions, understanding how to talk through problems, how to move things forward. And what we're seeing is a dramatic increase in productivity, in staff respect of each other, in happiness in the place. And those sound like little things, but when you combine them, it's so powerful to have the whole ecosystem working with this understanding that, emotions are a huge part of who we are. They actually make up everything. If I have an argument at home with my daughter on the way to work or something like that, it impacts me for probably 2 hours. However, if I'm being coached about how to deal with those emotions, I can deal with it so quickly. So I think having that kind of emphasis, which has sometimes been seen as a soft skill or a soft PD in the past, rather than what do I know about financials and business metrics and stuff, like all important. But really, it's like, if I don't have the people firing on all cylinders, particularly in education, but it's transferable to everything. It really is.
So those were extraordinary results that you've been seeing, and I can see how those are transformative and how they would impact teachers. As a former teacher, I can see that's the kind of training I wish I received when I was in schools. Now, what I'd like to ask you, one more question along that vein, which I'm going to ask you to improvise here off the top of your head, is what would be a particular strategy, even a self-reflective or self-awareness strategy that a business owner, let's say a CEO or a key executive, could take when it came to emotional coaching that they could help with their own situation right now?
I dealt with something this morning. A member of staff who was angry, emotional, upset about something that had happened in the morning situation. And so previously, I could have got into a whole back and forth about the situation. I would have had my back up because I'd have taken a personal stand somewhere along the line. I'd have made some assumptions about the person. I would have done all those kind of things. But what emotional coaching does is it forces you to, number one, listen. Listen with intent. And then the second thing you do is put yourself in that person's shoes. Is try and understand the perspective of the person that's talking to you. Like, what morning have they had? Where have they come from? What are they doing? And once you've got that, it's to then establish that we both understand that there's an emotional thing going on here. And once that emotion's being kind of dealt with, you're like, okay, now I've got that sorted out. It's like, okay, what's the real issue that's not emotional? And let's deal with that. And so once the emotions are dealt with and everyone understands, that what we found is that actually the issue was quite small. And we've moved through it quite quickly. And then we can discuss the emotional side of it again later. But what I found is it has solved a problem that typically would have maybe lingered for the weekend into next week, and it kept on recurring. But already that staff member's come back and said, thank you so much. That was definitely an emotional thing on my part. That other person wasn't right. And we've had a conversation now and it's good. And the other person's also had that training. So they had a much more productive conversation and we're moving forward. So that was just an example from this morning.
Yeah, that's so tangible. And what it sounds like to me is start with dealing with the emotion before you go to the head. So start with the heart, start with what's really that underlying anger, frustration, struggle, uncertainty, and then you go to the technical or you go to the business, then you go to the head, and they're much more open because of that.
That's right. But I want to be clear that this was not my idea. So this was my deputy head of the junior school thought it was a cool thing she had seen and brought it into the school. So this is not like something crazy cool I did. It's actually one of my team brought it in and we thought this is wonderful and moving forward. So yeah, I don't want to take credit for something that wasn't mine.
I like that. What I'd love to do is transition here with a little bit of a speed round. So these are meant to be quicker answers if you have them. If you don't know the answer, we can always pass. Yeah, I know you're sweating here just as I said that, but here we go. So James, what's a book you're reading now on education, or not even on education? You're also a history teacher. What's for you that you're consuming at the moment?
I often read multiple books. So quick answer. One is Breathe, the power of using breath correctly to control your body and to help you have a better day, which is actually hugely impactful. So you haven't done that, read it. The other one is this, it's about the French Revolution. So, and it's a different perspective on Robespierre and how he led and the impact of his leadership and whether or not it was actually significant or if he was just an academic that kind of made a few, I'm not going to say mistakes, but said some stuff that perhaps he didn't want to have said.
Yeah, well, I'll have to read that second book, Breathe, I Love, James Nectar, 5.5 times in through your nose.
Exactly.
Right. So
have you done the taping of the lips and sleeping at night? Like,
you know what? I've looked up on Amazon if because they have people who are good entrepreneurs who are selling tape for your mouth, so that's if you do it, I'll try it. Okay.
No, I've done it.
You've done it?
Why? Yeah, I've done it. I panicked. You panic, right? I had some good sleep. Yeah.
Did you? I have it back here on my bookshelf. So if you haven't read the book, Breathe, you have two people who have read it and gained value, both for health and even as I used to be out of breath when I gave talks for hours at a time. And I found that breathing through your nose, which is, I would say, one of his number one takeaways, if not number one, that helps energize you. And we could go on and on, but would you agree that's one of his main takeaways?
Breathing through the nose. And I was at a course at the weekend and it's breathing in and out through the nose. Like that was a big takeaway, because the effectiveness of that, and it's got healing properties in your nose that actually cleans the air on in and out. So yeah, I learned a hell of a lot from that.
Next question. What's one big issue you're grappling with, you're thinking about in education now?
Students' mental wellness, I would say, and the kind of the well-being of the students who have been through COVID and coming out of it, as making sure that we're looking after them and supporting them, because there's things that was missed. There was a lot of stuff that was missed in that time for socialization, and we're seeing gaps there. So for me, the biggest thing I'm seeing in education is wellness, actually, for staff and students, is making sure that as a community we can really tackle those issues and move forward from them.
Okay. I'm sure there's many answers to this question. Who's a mentor of yours that still impacts you, whether or not they're with us or no longer with us, on a daily basis in some way?
And I mean, I want to thank my coach chair, like Tim Redpath, who I know we're switching now, but he has been so impactful for me in terms of reflecting on things that I never even considered. I didn't think my personal situation had as much impact on my work situation as possible, but Tim for sure. And then my dad, who has passed away, but he was in education. And as I get older now, I reflect on some of the lessons he taught me, and I wish I'd listened more. I wish I'd been more present with him. He knew the world. And, there are lessons that he taught me that now I use to myself moving forward, that just simple things that I wish I'd listened to earlier.
Can you share one of them?
It's really simple, but the big thing is to just put one foot in front of the other, and the world's not as scary as you think it is. He would always say to me, it's like, as long as you can just keep moving forward, put one foot in front of the other, and do that, it's going to be okay. And it was this whole thing that's like, problems are way bigger in our heads than they are actual problems. But if you keep moving forward, you're going to be okay.
I love that. Move forward through challenges. Well, thank you for that. I'd love to transition a little bit, and I'm going to read to you things that when we did some research on you beforehand, you mentioned that you thought were key lessons throughout your career. And when I read them, if you have something to add, an example, something that comes to mind in the moment, it would be great to reflect on those. And I'm going to add one more element, how it might relate to leadership in the business world beyond, and it could be your own leadership. So the first one is keeping things simple.
That I think people, and I talk about this a lot with my leadership team in the school, we like to overcomplicate things. And when we overcomplicate things, people get confused and they don't do what you want them to do anyway. It's like when you're teaching a class. It's the best example I can give. I could read all the minute detail of something that happened in the course of the First World War, but they will learn none of that unless the message is simple, engaging, and something they can relate to. So why waste all that time when it's not going to be learned just because the textbook says it's important? For me, simplicity is the key to getting things done. And if you do enough simple things, it becomes complex. So that's the way I look at running a school. Is when I first became head, I was like sidetracked with all this stuff. It's got to be more complicated. It's got to be more academic. It's got to be more clever. And I was like, well, a few years in, I'm like, no, we're not getting anything done. Let's keep it simple. Let's do it well. And let's move to the next thing. And you know what? Now we're in this cool place.
Yeah, less is more, isn't it? So often.
I think so. I think so.
Trust your gut feelings.
I believe that our gut feelings 99.9% of the time are correct. Is that how you feel about an individual if you're interviewing someone? How you feel about a situation when you're trying to make a judgment on what happened in that scenario? How you feel about a decision that someone's trying to make that doesn't feel good to you? Okay, so now I really go to that feeling I have inside myself of what's right and what's wrong, and that guides me. And I question it. It's not mean that you can't change my mind. You can change my mind. But now I trust that feeling more than anything else as a first impulse. And then I can do the stuff around it and bring in research and things like that if I need to. But for me, that I really do trust that I've been around the world a bit now. I've had a lot of people, I've interacted with lots of different scenarios, and now I really trust that feeling. And ultimately, a lot of the decisions I make are on behalf of a school and behalf of a team, but they're my decisions in the end. And so if I don't believe in them, something fundamentally is wrong, then I'm not being true to myself, or the school, or the students, or the parents.
How do you teach that? How do you teach a child to start trusting their gut feeling? Or even an adult?
Yep. So I think that's an excellent question. I think that the way you get there is allowing people, in fact, insisting that people take risks and have failure. I don't think you can get there by being conservative and following what everyone else is doing. I was saying the other night, I was coaching my son, well, I was watching my son play rugby, and I was watching him, and he was scared to make a mistake because he thought that like he wouldn't get picked or anything like that. And we had a long conversation. I said, you have to make mistakes to learn. And the biggest learning comes from them. But there will be times where you just don't get something because of that. But when you develop that ability to make mistakes, you learn from it. And then eventually that becomes your gut instinct, because your gut instinct isn't just the feeling. It's actually something that's been developed over years and years and years and years of making mistakes, seeing decisions, watching things happen. It's not just some supernatural thing that comes to you. It's actually, the body does that over time. It takes in all this information, all these experiences, and then you get to a feeling, which if you ignore, I think I sometimes think I'm just not being true to myself. And then I don't like the decision that's come from it.
It reminds me of a quote from the movie Three Kings with George Clooney and Mark Wahlberg and Spike Jonze, when he says, do the thing you fear and the courage comes afterwards.
Exactly. And I think if we got a lot more people doing that in safe environments first, then when the big decisions have to be made, it's way more informed. What I don't like at the moment is I think we have a world of people making decisions that they get this gut feeling, but it's not been informed by anything, because it's just like, oh, I've got this power. Wonderful. Let's do that. So yeah, I think that it's not something that it's something that develops over years.
Over years, right, with experience and wisdom. Yeah.
That's the only thing we can rely on being old. As we get older, the only thing what the students say to me is like, I like getting old because I have wisdom, which means experience. That's the only thing I have. They're smarter than me, so I can hold on to wisdom.
What about, you once wrote, don't accept poor behavior is a lesson that you tried to model throughout your career. Can you expand on that a bit? I'm interested.
Yeah. I think that more than anything, what you accept is what the place becomes. So like if you accept poor behavior, then people see that and they think it's fine to be poorly behaved. And that goes from a classroom, that goes to a workplace, that goes to a business, that goes to a relationship at home, that goes to anything in my experience. In a classroom, if I accept poor behavior, the other students see that and go, cool, we can do that too. Or I don't know if I like his character because that's been accepted. In the workplace, if you accept chitter-chattering or gossiping and you don't address it, well then don't be surprised that the culture of the place becomes chitter-chattering and gossip. Because as a leader, people are watching to see what you accept and what you allow to go and what you don't challenge. Because then human beings do this as a matter of course. They just they will find ways that they can do things which maybe aren't aligned with you. If you accept it, then they'll continue to just get worse and worse and worse. And I have made that mistake. I've made that mistake to accept poor behavior, and I've seen it spiral and get worse and worse and worse. And you can lose a classroom, you can lose a staff room, you can lose a whole bunch of people because you don't tackle things that you know are poor behavior.
And would you say that that's standard, or that ability to catch it in it, catch poor behavior and set a boundary or address it is a key element of culture?
I think culture is what we won't accept. Is you set that, like this school, I say it every single week. I'm sure parents and the kids are sick of it. We're a family. We're our family, and as a family, we laugh together, we cry together, we're truthful together, we're honest, we talk. But if I if I then don't live those values, if I'm not honest, if I'm not truthful, if I'm not like showing who I am, then that whole culture is dead. It's just a word. And so I think it's I actually think it's the hardest thing to do as a leader, to challenge poor behavior. It's really, really, really hard, because I think people want to be liked. And when you challenge poor behavior, there's a risk that you're not going to be liked. Whereas the truth of the matter is, you're respected way more if you do it. But I've made mistakes. I've made a ton of them. And I probably continue to make them sometimes.
Well, like you said, making mistakes is part of growth, and it's important, I think, as adults, whether it's in a school or a business, to take those risks, which you sometimes talked about earlier, about that being a core tenet of what you're teaching the girls, is be a risk taker. And along those lines, I think making mistakes and owning them and learning from them is an essential component of building that culture of learning.
Yeah, no, for sure. It really is. It really is.
And one more point along those lines is, this was your statement, which I found interesting how it was phrased. You wrote, "Fine is dangerous. Fine is dangerous." I think it's a good place to segue after "don't accept poor behavior." So how do you see that? How fine is dangerous? It seems like a concept almost, right?
Okay, so this is actually, as a school, we're adopting this now as a way as we work, because it's like saying mediocre is cool. So by fine, we mean, you know what, I hear so many people saying, "Oh, my teacher was just fine. You know what, that piece of work I did was just fine." And I'm worried in the world right now that education, people are accepting fine as a standard. And for me, it's like, are we really okay with the most important people in our lives as our kids, the most important people for the future, the children? Like, they have fine teachers, they have a fine curriculum, they have a fine school. It's not okay. It's not okay. Unless we change the narrative to, we need really awesome teachers, cool teachers who are inspiring these people to be better. We need an awesome environment. We need an environment that allows kids to be kids for way longer. Why are we asking them to grow up at the age of 12 into something to an adult? I'm like, it's ridiculous. So for me, I'm so frustrated that the world accepts fine for education, fine for kids, fine for what we're teaching, and fine for it. I just think it's incredibly dangerous that we're not holding ourselves as educators, schools, institutions, systems to a higher standard than fine. So as a school, our next iteration of our values and mission and vision, it was actually through working with a speaker from TEC, we're actually going to be using that line as a disruptor statement that fine is dangerous, because it is, for me, that's the biggest threat to us as we move forward, is to accepting education to just be fine. That is not okay. And no parent can sit there and convince me that it's fine to have a mediocre education.
Point taken. Yes. Back to one thing that we've spoken of a few times, and it is one of our common points, is TEC. As a leader, you're someone who has to see the big picture. As a head of school, I would imagine, if I'm empathizing, even though I haven't been a head of school, and someone who's also a teacher on the front lines with students in the classroom. What have you learned in the environment of TEC, whether it's Tim, Redpath is your coach, or the other business leaders from across your area, Ottawa? What have you learned about what it means to be a leader in being in an environment with other leaders that you've taken into your role?
It's been game-changing for me. So I've been in education. I was in professional sport, came into education, was a teacher, went into leadership, but I knew nothing about business. I'm just going to be clear about it. I knew nothing about business. I became the head of school, and an independent private school is an independent school. The difference, just quickly, is independent is we're not for profit. So high tuition, people come here, but it's the private is that the owners take all the money. So I have a board of governors that control that oversee me and the school. So anyway, I came into this role and I realized very quickly that I have a business here. Like I have people who pay tuition to come here. I have a marketing, communications team, admissions, sales, all of those things. I am a business. Yeah, I'm also delivering education, which to me at the first kind of like didn't sit well, because in education it's all about the kids, but now I love it, because actually what I realize about being a business is that you're pushed to deliver the very, very best product. And for me, the product is education and learning that you possibly can. So coming into tech was a huge shock, because I was then surrounded by these business leaders who were holding me accountable. And a real classic example was, I remember at the end of the first year, we were at a retreat, and it became very obvious I was in the weeds. Like as a leader, I was too involved in the operational stuff, and I wasn't leading from high above and seeing the vision of the school. And I hadn't realized that myself. I transitioned from a teacher to a leadership position to this head of school, but I was still in the weeds. I was still interfering with stuff that I shouldn't have done. I wasn't trusting people around me. I wasn't building leaders around me. And what tech did and what all those business leaders did is they held me to account and said, that is garbage. You can't do that. Or you can, but you're going to be ineffective and your business is not going to thrive. And so I took a long, hard look at myself, put my head between my tail, kind of walked away. I was like, oh God, that was hard. But then I came back and I started to do that. I started to give more ownership of, and my leadership team know it. Like I started to trust them more. I gave them ownership of things, and now they're thriving and the school's in a really good place. I'm not the smartest person in the room. And what's great now is all these other really cool, smart people are taking ownership and leadership. That wouldn't have happened without tech. It just wouldn't. How to understand business metrics, like what's going on with the economy, what's going on with HR, what's going on with how you pay employees, how to do severances effectively. What does things like EBITDA mean? Like there's all these stuff that I just didn't know. And so for the last 3 to 8 years, my learning curve has been up here, but I would say it's been the biggest single, most impactful thing for me as a leader.
Wow. What do you wish more people understood about being a leader today, so that maybe they can empathize with their leaders, with their heads of schools, their principals, the people that they meet every day who they don't know what's truly going on in their world? What do you wish people took a moment and understood about what it means to be a leader?
For me, I was just shocked about how lonely it becomes. Like I was really, really surprised that you can't have those connections and friendships that you maybe had before. You just can't, because it causes so many issues within the organization if you're seen to have a favorite or if you're seen to be friends with someone, and suddenly you're kind of taken out of that role and you're on your own. And there are decisions you have to make which may impact people that were friends and things like that. And ultimately in a business and in a school like mine is that the board's job is to hire and fire me. They're incredible. My board are amazing. They are so supportive and strategic and helpful, but ultimately, and they're right, is that their job is to make sure that the leader is right for the school. You realize every decision you make is really, really, really important. And you sometimes can't, well, you just can't ask everybody, because sometimes it's maybe about them. So for me, I just wish people understood that actually, like, one, you're trying your best and it's so lonely. It's like, who do you talk to? And you go home at night and your spouse doesn't want to talk to you about that because they've had a hard day too. Your kids are dealing with it. And so you kind of end up having that, like, I love Henry V and Shakespeare, and that dark night of the soul he talks about, where you're kind of on your own and you're in your head and thinking about everything. And for me, I just wish that's why tech's been great, is because they're not in education. They're not competition to me. So those people in that room are my trusted advisors, because I can talk to them about anything. And it's not impacting my day-to-day work. So yeah, I wish it was less lonely, I guess, but I think that's just what it is.
Well, thank you for your vulnerability, because I think it's helpful when you state someone in your position in a leadership role says it can be lonely in a leadership role. People listening might reflect back and say, oh, I'm not alone when he's talking about his loneliness at moments in that position. And on that point, I'm curious your thoughts on, you have a unique vantage point to answer this question, which is vulnerability. So often now, this is not a catchphrase. People talk about it's important for leaders to show some vulnerability. When you're on the ground every day as a leader, can you speak to what that means and whether or not you believe, and I know it's a nuanced question, does vulnerability have a place for a leader when you're in the office, not in your tech group where vulnerability, that intimacy is an important part of the culture to share things in the room that will help you process and deal with them? I'm talking about in your day-to-day role. What does vulnerability mean, and does it have its place?
You can be too vulnerable where you share too much and people lose confidence in the organization or who you are because they're worried that you're constantly worried or scared or fearful about something. So I think that you can go way too far with it, but actually I find that being vulnerable shows a willingness to accept your weaknesses and to realize that there is strength around you. So in my leadership team, we're all very vulnerable now because we've opened up. We've talked about what our strengths and weaknesses are, what our fears are. It's part of what we do as a team. And that builds strength around us. Am I going to do that with everyone in the school? No, because do I trust? You have to implicitly trust people if you're going to get to that point. And it's really powerful, but we do it with the leadership team. I actually also do it in the classroom with the kids, because you have to model that failure is going to be okay. You have to model that sometimes you're not going to get it right. Like if a student asks me a question, I don't know the answer. A lot of teachers make it up. They tell something that's not quite true. I'm just like, you know what? I actually don't know the answer to that. But you know what's really cool? Let's find it out together. There's vulnerability in that sense. And the kids love that because they're like, okay, that's cool. He's human. And then you lose this mystique of being like the answer of all questions, which you're not. I'm a facilitator. I'm a connector as a teacher. I'm not a master of knowledge. Google's got that down. So for me, it's about vulnerability, but when it's right time and place, right circumstances. And I think it's an expert skill about when and how. And I think that goes back to gut instinct, is when you know it's right to be vulnerable. When they're about to study for exam, if I'm like, I haven't got a clue, that's not helping. But when we're in that learning moment, it's really helpful. But I think it's great, but I think it's something that you develop as a leader over time. And I wouldn't go into a role in a new school being 100% vulnerable.
Yeah, I really respond to that idea of, if you don't know, saying I don't know, or saying let's go over and figure this out. At one point, before I was an educator, I worked in TV, and I would see, and I saw this multiple times, some of the most successful TV and film directors anywhere were asked questions by their crew. And they would say, without self-consciousness, you know what? I don't know. Let's go over and see what we should do with sound. You know what? I'm not sure about that. Let's talk to the set designers and make it work. And these were people who were in the business for 20, 30, or 40 years. And so I like that idea of being a learn-it-all, not a know-it-all. And people feel, junior members of a team who just come, they realize, oh, I can admit that I'm imperfect because my leader is clearly open to not being perfect and figuring it out along with us.
That is such a cool example of the Hollywood, of like just someone admitting to it and then learning together. It's really cool. It's the most impactful learning I've ever had with kids is when that happens.
You mentioned something that I have been pondering when I do workshops and keynotes and events, which in a way is education, just in a different forum. Talk to me about, you said something that stood out. You said leaders are facilitators, teachers are facilitators. Can you expand on that? I'm interested to hear your take on that.
Yeah. So when you come into the job as a teacher, you're kind of, the first thing you do is like, do I know all the content? It's like, am I an expert in my subject matter? And right there is the problem with education. That one statement is the problem of education, because you're never going to be a master of your subject. You can't be. It develops, it changes. History, for example, revisionist theories is coming out left, right, and center. So I can be well informed, I have to be well read and I have to know it. But what my job is to do is to facilitate the people in the room to find the answers to the questions that are being asked. And by that, I mean asking good questions. But more importantly than that is by getting them to ask good questions. Because I have a whole repertoire of excellent questions. But what I find is the most effective learners are those who can actually ask really effective questions. So they start with like, I don't know, what year was that? And I'm like, well, let's develop that question. And you get to a point where they say, well, so which of these two was the most effective leader in terms of their political understanding of this cause? And then you go from like kind of like factual question to a question that really gets them to synthesize and evaluate. The facilitation role is to take it away from being you're the master of the room to they are the people that can make the difference. They're the learners. We're all learning together, and you have to give them power to develop and move forward. And if I just sat in the class and just say, hey, you know, I don't know, the Spanish Civil War, this happened, so take notes, you'll be fine in the exam. They will be fine in the exam, but they won't learn anything. So that's where I am with it. Facilitation, like the best teachers are the best connectors and facilitators. And they're the best people with human beings. Like teachers are the best teachers are the best relationship builders.
Best relationship builders. I think there's also a business case for that too, in terms of business leaders as facilitators and not neglecting the human side, because like you said earlier as well, is you're dealing with people every day, but business teams are dealing with people every day too.
Yeah, I think being part of this world together is like, we can't forget the fact that our job really is to connect with each other, is to build relationships. That's what makes humans so incredible, is the relationships that we form and that we learn together. And I think if you put someone on a pedestal as the master of something, you're in dangerous territory, I think.
I don't want to put anyone on the pedestal, but what I would be curious is, I suspect that one of your key values, if not a value, focuses at Elmwood is to create real leaders in the world, is to have your girls go out in the world with whatever path they choose and to really make a difference as leaders. So my question to you is, what female leaders in the world do you see as role models for your girls that you've referenced, that come up in class, that come up in your conversations to help guide who they see as what is possible for them?
It's so funny. We were just talking about this in class. We were talking about causation of war and how historically war could have been avoided if we had more female leaders in the room, because of the complexity of thought, the ability to think beyond a simple solution. I'm not putting men down, because I am one, so I don't want to do that. But female leaders that have inspired me, Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand, ex-Prime Minister of New Zealand, was to me an exemplary example of a leader. And why? Because she had very clear belief systems, unwavering from them, but did it with such kindness and respect and power and intelligence, which, by the way, I think is really missing in the world right now. I think a lot of our leaders don't, even if they are intelligent, they don't always display it. And I think it's because they feel that people might not understand. I think that's a real disservice to the human race. And so someone like Jacinda was just perfect. I was so sad that when she stepped down, I understand the reasons why. And I think the press have a lot to answer for like how they interrogate leaders in the world. But for me, she was inspiring. And you know what? When I was in Washington this summer, I met a leader who was in Rwanda, and she was incredible because it wasn't ever about her. It was about, she was serving others. And I think female leaders really do that as a natural thing, is to serve others. Whereas sometimes men, male leaders, and again, there are amazing male leaders, but they like the egotistical side of things sometimes. And for people like Jacinda and this leader in Rwanda, for sure, they're governed by much more than just kind of like egotistical answers, much more complex, much more compassionate, much more, and that doesn't mean weak, that means firm actually, because they see things in a much more complex way. But Jacinda Ardern for me was like one of the most incredible leaders that we've seen recently. One of my students said Angela Merkel was one of their most inspiring leaders, just because of the of what she tackled and how she took it on, and unwavering belief and not moving from the lines that she took. That was there. And then for me, it's really my mum as well. Like, it's like your mother is probably the first female role model you have, and for me, it's like the ability to see goodness in everything, and the most important thing, the ability to forgive. I think that from what I see is that female leaders have a way higher capacity to forgive and understand that there's a lot of complexity about what people do.
Wow. Yes to all of that.
I do think male leaders can, but like, I'm inspired by female leadership already. Well, obviously I'm in this role because I'm surrounded by incredible young people, but I am very inspired by female leaders for sure.
Yeah. And, again, as parents, there are incredible male leaders, there are extraordinary female leaders. I think it's okay to have our sons and daughters look to both, right? And to see qualities that, even though we were general with, well, you gave specific examples. I have a son too. And so we will talk about what male leaders that he sees in the world and that I want to introduce him to. And the same father-daughter conversations is, I ask my daughter, or I introduce her as a 10-year-old to women in the world that I see as role models in some way. And so I think it has a place to talk about both and what we can gain from those, what their traits are.
It's so important, like the concept that, I mean, we're a human race that has men and women in it, and to try and exclude one from the other is crazy. I run an all-girls school, but we live in a world where those relationships are so important. We have a lot of male teachers here, and I think it's so important for the students to have really strong male role models and female role models, because that's what we live in the world.
Yes. And on that note, James, if we were back together a year from now, celebrating that your work of school has evolved and grown beyond what you ever could have imagined, I know it's only a year, was possible, what are some of the things we're celebrating?
So I would say number one is that when I look around, and I see it now, that I see a student body that is having an incredible time. They're having a lot of fun, a lot of laughter, a lot of smiles, that they are developing themselves in all spheres, not just on the academics. But most importantly, that they're going into the world with a passion and a purpose that they're going to follow through on, that they have the skills and attitudes to follow through on, and they're gonna change the world. And I just wish in a year's time I could say that for the whole system of education. I run a microcosm. What I really would love to see in a year's time, and it can't happen in a year, is that every single kid gets the same advantages from an incredible environment of a school that's safe, that's rewarding, that allows you to be a kid for as long as you need to be, that allows you to educate yourself free from risk and fear and all that stuff. And I don't think it's difficult to do. And for me, I think in a year's time, I would love to see a world where, like, education, the standard is raised, the expectations are raised, and these kids have some real opportunities across the board, because there are so many wonderful, wonderful young people out there that need higher standards given to them.
James, one of the key elements that I heard and I learned from this conversation is the importance of leaders leading by example and how they communicate how they treat people with kindness and respect, like some of the values you mentioned are paramount and top of mind at Elmwood, and being open to others' opinions and diverse perspectives like you are in your business mastermind group, TEC. I really want to thank you for inspiring those who are listening, who are in the business world and in education, of what it truly means to be a leader. I remember Benjamin Franklin as a historian. This is a line you may or might not have heard of, and I don't even know if he said it, but your action speaks so loud I can't hear what you're saying. Or that might have been Emerson, so I might have got the wrong historian in that regard. But what I saw with you was someone who really walks their talk with both their action and their words. And as a father of a daughter, I can only hope that my daughter gets an education like the one that you're giving the girls at Elmwood. So I want to thank you, James Whitehouse, for being a guest on the Leadership Standard.
Well, thank you so much. And I just encourage you to take away the word hope, and let's make sure that we have education systems that really are incredible for everybody.
Yes. And on that note, this has been another episode of the Leadership Standard, where we operate from the philosophy that leaders are made and not born. And our guest today gave us strategies and really an operating system of what that means in the real world if you are leading teams. So if you haven't already, please subscribe to hear more from leaders across the spectrum of business and education and beyond for leading with confidence and accomplishing your goals. I'm Jamie Mason Cohen. I'll see you soon.